Okay, so, oh, perfect. We're live now. Hi, everyone. I'm June. I'm the Viet Film Fest Programming Fellow. So first off, I would like to thank our community partners at UCI Library Southeast Asian Archive. So Eric, this artistic director, and I put together this set on the refugee, immigration, and deportation experience, and also kind of how the second and third generation might feel the ripple effects of that experience. So this is kind of a very difficult and sometimes very emotional topic to explore. And I really want to thank you guys all for delving into this topic that affects so many people, not only in the Vietnamese community, but also beyond. So first of all, I think we should kind of go around and maybe introduce ourselves. I'm June, as I said, the VIF programming fellow. In my other life, I'm also a PhD student in comparative literature at UC Irvine. And just very briefly, my dissertation is about how Taoist ideas are represented in films from China and Taiwan. But yeah, so maybe we can like go around, starting with Melanie, just a brief introduction.
Hi, y'all. Thanks so much for having me here in this space. I'm so excited to share my film with everyone. My name is Melanie Ding Ho. I'm calling from the very humid Jacksonville, Florida. And I'm the director of the film Shang Dai, which means to live here. And it was filmed in New Orleans. I'm so excited to have everyone see it. Thank you.
Louisa, you're next.
Hi, my name is Louisa Fong Yi. I am on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, otherwise known as Vancouver, BC, Canada. And I'm the director and writer of Hope and Grace, which was filmed here, but based on my family. So very excited to be part of Viet Fest.
And Lan, you're next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lang Wing. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of Fighting for Family, which is a 30-minute documentary about a family from the indigenous tribes of Vietnam separated by incarceration and deportation. Thanks for having us.
All right, cool. So I'll kind of start off by asking each of you questions first, and then we'll kind of have a time where I ask you guys to answer like some overall questions. So I'll start with Melanie. I don't speak Vietnamese, unfortunately, so I'm just gonna say the translation. So your film, To Live Here, is composed of interviews with New Orleans farmers and shrimpers about their refugee experience. So how and why did you choose them as the subjects for your film?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Um, I guess first and foremost, I wanted to make a film in the South, based in the South of the US, just because I'm from there and I think it's really important to share those stories that aren't often on the screen. And I started off wanting to do something about food waste, so things related to food, the process of harvesting food, growing food. For me, like rau muang, which is water spinach, is really important to my family just because I don't know, there's something really special about it being grown in like a kiddie pool in our backyard that's filled with like soil and water. So that was my angle coming in. And I went to New Orleans one summer and I just went to like Viet specific areas and I talked to a bunch of people. And I got connected to the shrimper because we shared a like similar accent. My family's from Hue, and like I guess my Hue accent is really thick, and so that's how I connected to folks. And then I also just somehow stumbled upon the farmers, and everyone was really kind to me, and I just was learning a lot from them, and they just allowed me to share their stories. So that's how I got connected to them.
That's really cool. I really liked that you kind of connected with them through language too, and specifically through like a dialect of Vietnamese. Um, so at one point in your film, you asked the question, Nuoc as in water, as in homeland, what does it mean to lose a homeland? And I thought that was just such an evocative question. Can you kind of explain how you came up with that firstly? And then secondly, like how would you answer that question?
Yeah, so um Yeah, well, language is really important to me because my parents don't speak English and I only speak to them in Vietnamese. But I wouldn't say that my Vietnamese is the best at all. There's a lot of miscommunication at times. But something that stuck out to me when I was thinking about Vietnamese in this film was that I hear the word "mắc nước" a lot, which means to lose a homeland. But when I hear it, I only hear the word "nước," which translates to water. But I guess "nước" itself could also be water and homeland. So I think that was like a stepping stone of thinking about that question. But also within the film, there's I think about 3 or 4 questions that are being asked on screen from my own point of view, and it's my voice that's saying those asking those questions. Um, and I guess there are questions that I would want to ask my own parents, but I've never had the courage to. And I think this film was kind of like an exploration of the trauma that I can feel my parents like, they lived through the war in Vietnam, and it's, like, the trauma that I feel that's haunting them, and I grew up observing, but I never really had the language to sit down and talk to them about it, and I don't think that, like even now, I haven't really asked them about it, like, I heard bits and pieces of these stories growing up, but they were never, like, full narratives that I heard, and it's like, even now, if I wanted to ask them about it, I don't know where to start. And so these are the questions that I kind of are the stepping stone for me to understand their past. And I think like understanding community's past is understanding my parents' past as well. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's like my approach to it.
Yeah, thank you. And then another question I had, because I think your film it was a little bit experimental too, kind of the overlayering of like the questions in your voice with these scenes. Sometimes they're like industrial scenes, sometimes they're like fishing scenes. And you also use a lot of long shots, long takes in your film. And you kind of, in one of your narrative parts, you say that you're exploring the intimacy of the mundane. So I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit about what you were inspired by, what kind of films you were inspired by, and why you use the long take so much.
Mhm. Yeah. So I guess I spoke a little bit about this before, but like as a person, I'm kind of an observer of like my parents growing up, I just was an observer. And that's how I think I navigate the world. I observe a lot and I take a lot of time to watch and listen and learn. And I guess that's the way that I wanted to approach the film as well. Because I think New Orleans has a very specific landscape and a very specific setting. And I wanted that the place to have a really big like part of the film. I wanted it to take up a lot of space, and I think that's my way of sharing that. It's taking a moment to pause, to share the sounds, and to share the landscape a bit for the viewers to become observers themselves. Um, and can I get the first part of your question again, please?
Just like what directors you were inspired by for the style of your film.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for repeating that. I'd also say that Hale County, this evening, by Ramel Ross, is an experimental film based in the South that I find really, um, I find that like really interesting for me to watch, and I really like the style of it because it's also observational and it's very place based. So I think that's like one of the films that I would say I drew from a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Um, is there anything else you'd like to kind of tell the audience about your film that we didn't cover here?
Yeah, I hope for the film to be a place where folks can have like an intergenerational dialogue where folks can really feel like safe to ask questions to those around them about their histories and to learn. So I hope it's a conversation piece and it's a place where they can feel safe to ask these questions.
Cool. Cool. Thank you, Melanie. So moving on to Hope and Grace. So we kind of know from the synopsis that it's based on true events. And we see that and I don't know if this is true, but it seems like there's documentary footage placed at the end of the short film right? So Louisa, would you mind telling us the story that kind of inspired this film?
So I'm definitely like part of the generation, the first generation that's born in Canada and the diaspora of Vietnamese Chinese people that have scattered across, the world after the war. And so, it's always that question of like, how did you get your name? Especially since my name is so not Asian, my legal name. And so using that, I kind of like, and like my experience as a Canadian, and to kind of like share, even though like you lose your home, that you can find a new one in a new place, and it doesn't have to be scary. Although funny enough, like since I've made that film, my education in regards to like Vietnam and like connecting more with Vietnamese family members and people, it's definitely like, oh, this is definitely like the idealized version of what my family was, because in fact, my parents never, like, they didn't stay together, they divorced and all this stuff. So but the heart of it, it's like the idealized version is that, we come here to a new country, and, you know, not only do, yes, we assimilate to the culture, but also we build new friendships. And that's kind of what I was really hoping to get across in the film. And that even though you've left home, that you can build a new one wherever you are. And so, so it's not only my story. I've like heard from other people. There's like a director's cut version where, other neighbors help as well. So yeah, that's kind of like what inspired the story of Hope and Grace.
So the film centers on the struggles of refugees to Canada who fled the war in Vietnam, but it's framed as a flashback. And it's like a story that a daughter tells the granddaughter about her grandparents, right? So it kind of brings up the theme of like, this intergenerational transmission of trauma and memories of the refugee experience. So how do you kind of see the second and third generations relationship to the refugee experience yourself?
Actually, I'm going to answer this as well as the end part of your last question, because I totally like forgot you asked it. By the way, I'm also neurodivergent. I have ADHD, so unless I remember, I totally forget. The found footage at the end is actually filmed footage, so it was connected obviously to our actors, and it was meant to tie into the current refugee situation with all the things that are happening in Afghanistan and other refugees that are like just scattering the world, because we need to help them just as much as we've been helped. And so anyways, so what was the question again? Can you put it back on the screen?
Yeah, I can summarize.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like now the adults, this generation of our parents, are starting to ask the questions and really explore what generational trauma is and how we got here. And it's kind of like repeating that cycle of like, when people were talking about World War II and Nazi occupation, that took long time, like 30, 40 years before people were comfortable speaking about it. So I think this is kind of like in the last 10 years, 15 years, people are really starting to look and reflect as to what happened. And now we're looking at the repercussions of generational trauma, of displacement, of refinding culture. Right now, Hollywood is doing that thing where it's actually starting to explore diaspora. So you see like movies like Nora from Queens, and there's other movies that are Asian American that are coming out exploring it, but we're not Asian enough. We're not American enough or North American enough. Like Shang-Chi, that was a huge question because Awkwafina, her character went over, and she had obviously like her whole family was in America, but when she went back to China, even then it was kind of like, oh, like you don't actually know, your accent's terrible. Like they didn't say it, but you kind of know it. So I think that's kind of where we are, and hopefully in the next couple of generations, like we'll like settle more into our own culture and be more accepted as not as descendants of our Asian cultures, but also like creating our own and identity and be firm in it and like be proud of it. So
Yeah, for sure. I definitely feel you about the kind of not being this enough or not being that enough as a Chinese American. Definitely going back to China is always weird, and then being here and interacting with kind of first generation immigrants, it's like I am also kind of different from them. So yeah, thank you for acknowledging that. So I guess this isn't exactly a question, but I just feel like your film has like a very hopeful spirit. I mean, hope is in the name, is in the title. And you show this kind of friendship between the neighbors with the refugees who are new to I was about to say the US, who are new to Canada. So, and this friendship sort of forms in spite of all of the barriers, cultural and linguistic. So can you talk a little bit about that? And I guess I'm kind of asking you about like, how does that happen? How do you kind of form friendships across these like huge barriers?
I think like in real life, like how in my story, it was actually my babysitter, what we call my babysitter, and in now terms we would call it nanny, but um, because Vietnam was, and they were Portuguese. So because Vietnam was colonized by Portugal at some point, there was a connection. And so, you know, like, and I don't know why that connection exists, but they became friends, my biological mom um, and the next door neighbor who lived upstairs kind of situation. And then she took care of me while my mom worked and my dad worked. And you know, and she did it from like 2 months old until I was 7 or 8 years old. So it was like a really substantial friendship that was built there. And I think in the case of in real life, it was like immigrant recognizing refugee kind of like um, situational like displacement. In the film, it was Indigenous peoples to Canada, and it was a little bit of a commentary about people coming into land that doesn't belong to them. But in this case, it wasn't voluntary, and they were both displaced on this land. So it was that kind of like recognition of mother to mother, of human to human, woman to woman, and that struggle is struggle no matter where you are and who you are and what you look like, and we all need a little help. And so and that's kind of, yeah, like I see so much. I was like on Netflix today looking for something nice to watch, and it's all Halloween stuff, of course, right? And all like angry stuff. And I'm just like, man, I just wanted to watch something that makes me feel good and makes me feel like there's something more to this world than just like anger. And so that's kind of why I made this film. I was like, I just want to see something nice, and that's also true. So there you go.
Cool. Any last words for the audience? What you hope they'll take away from it?
I think it's kind of like Melanie said. It's like just because there's a language barrier or a looks barrier, or like, don't let those be barriers. Try to look past them, so that way, um, you know, you might find new friendships, new like common ground, and also learn something different. And you know, I see a lot of dissent, especially now in the world, and you know, we need less of that and more connection. And yeah, you know, and one of the funniest things I find is the accent barrier. You can be speaking a fully like fluently in English, but if you have a slight accent that's not British, it's, you know, like this huge thing, as if like you're like, I'm like, I'm sorry, did we just learn a whole other language so that we can communicate with you? You know, that's like more than most people, because certainly I don't speak Vietnamese. I speak dim sum Cantonese. So but anyway, yeah.
Thank you, Louisa. All right, so moving on to Fighting for Family. Lon, I thought you did a really amazing job of illustrating kind of the pain of being separated from loved ones and the damage that that separation can cause families. And this, for me, was especially clear when Chu and Rex, your main characters, became really emotional on camera when they were talking about one another. So I know you sort of already answered this in the pre-festival interview, but can you kind of recap for the panel How do you as a filmmaker deal with these emotionally charged moments, and how do you decide what to keep and what to cut?
Yeah, thank you for your kind words about the film and for that really important question about how do we as filmmakers, specifically documentary filmmakers, handle emotionally charged moments. The way I approached this was in collaboration with the family featured in the film and asking for their consent to participate in the interview, consent to continue participating as they got emotional. And in the editing process, like as documentary filmmakers, we have that written consent form. Legally, like we can kind of do whatever we want, but ethically, like it's a whole different question. So as I was editing and putting things together, having a continuous conversation with the family in the film and asking them for consent to include these moments, but also explaining my reasoning for, like why I would like to include these moments, like to show people who may not like understand the pain of deportation. I've talked with so many people who, in response to watching the film, have shared with me like, oh, like I used to think that deportation wasn't that bad because I thought it was just people being sent home. And in the film, we see that Chuchi, as he got deported to Vietnam, like that was not his home. His home was the United States. It's where his friends were. It's where his family members were. That's where he had built this community that continues to fight for him to this day. And the emotion that we see in the film really helps convey those feelings of home and the attachments of like, what does it mean to be home and what does it mean to be forced out of your home? So I think the main word for me would be consent and collaboration in terms of like making those really tough and important decisions.
Yeah, that's great. And I feel like that also sort of connects maybe to your background and activism. Can you talk a little bit about how that background informs your artistic vision?
Yes. So I have a background as a community organizer, and the area that I'm most involved in is around issues of incarceration and deportation. At the time of making this film, I was doing a lot of direct support for our Southeast Asian community members who were at risk of being deported, many of whom had previous sentences, previous stints in prison and were formerly incarcerated. So what the support looked like was like we would create petitions for them to try to get their order of deportation canceled. We'd connect them with lawyers and resources, try and then do large scale community demonstrations to try to get more awareness of the issue. And I think the most emotional thing for me was accompanying impacted people to ICE check-in. So folks who have orders of deportation have to check into ICE every year. And it's like a quick 5-minute thing. The ICE agents are just like, have you been followed? Have you committed any crimes? Have you moved, et cetera, et cetera? And it's like in and out 5 minutes. But sometimes like when you come in and you answer all the questions right, they may choose to just detain you and deport you. I don't know what goes on in the back for ICE and how they make those decisions, but that's something that happens. And so we accompany them in case that does happen. We can take their belongings and communicate with their families and like provide small instances of support. So as I was doing this very emotional, very I don't know, like it's just like very heartbreaking work for the community in collaboration with the community. I was having conversations with people who were not involved in the work and explaining why I do the work with my background as someone who grew up working class in a predominantly people of color neighborhood that was very much impacted by policing and incarceration. So for people who didn't come from that background, there's a lot of questions about, like, why do you do that? And like sometimes I'd have conversations with people who were like, you know what, like, I think these people should be deported because of their criminal history. And I really wanted to like interrogate what it means to be impacted by these systems and have audiences learn the stories of people who are impacted by these systems and start like questioning the way that we're trained to think. We're trained to think that, if someone is impacted by incarceration, that means that they failed our society, they did something wrong. But in the film, it really interrogates all the ways in which systems of settler colonialism, systems of imperialism, poverty, refugee resettlement, policing, the unfair legal systems, how all of these systems fail individuals, and shifting the blame from the individual to the systems and to ourselves, and how we contribute to these systems that are tearing families apart. So in some, I think my experience as a community organizer, I saw opinions from people who didn't understand what was going on, and I created this film in hopes of spreading awareness of the issue.
Cool, thank you, Len. So this is sort of like a typical question one would ask somebody who is a documentary filmmaker, but I want to hear your take on it. So how do you respectfully portray a community, in this case, the Montagnards, as an outsider and a filmmaker who does not claim that identity?
Yeah, this is something that I have been reflecting on and taking very seriously as someone who is Vietnamese ethnic Gin. My people, we are of the ethnic majority. We are of the colonizing class in Vietnam, and our people are actively participating in or complicit to the stealing of lands that's still happening to this day of Montagnard people, of the indigenous people in the Central Highlands. So I think for me, a very small thing that I always try to do is for people who are not aware of the indigenous community, oftentimes my film will get labeled as a film about a Vietnamese family. And the family, they're not Vietnamese, they're Montagnard, they don't identify as Vietnamese. And so I think always, for me, being very careful with language and never calling them Vietnamese. They are indigenous, they're Sadang and Ragnao, or they like to be called Montagnard, the specific family. So always spreading awareness and centering that indigenous identity. And also for me, being really putting my money where my mouth is. The film, I budgeted for consultation from members of the Montagnard community to consult me in not only writing the film and editing the film, but also how do we do outreach to the Montagnard community as well as the Vietnamese community after the film has been released. So in the past few weeks, months, 2 years, in the past 2 years, it's been 2 years since the film was released. In the past 2 years, I've been doing a lot of collaboration with various Montagnard organizations. And if anyone is watching and you'd like to learn more about Montagnard organizations, I recommend checking out the Montagnard American Association based in North Carolina, as well as Voices of the Highlands, which highlights the story of Montagnard American youth. So it's checking out Montagnard organizations and centering their leadership in the outreach that we have been doing in regards to not only promoting the film, but also mobilizing audiences to support these issues in the film.
Cool. And as with all the other filmmakers, is there anything you would like to say to our audience that you haven't previously covered?
Oh, sorry, was the question for me or was it an open question?
Yeah, it's for you, Lon.
It's for me. Sorry about that. I had the question was, is there anything else I'd like to share with the audience?
Or just like, what do you hope the viewer will take away?
Thank you. I hope that viewers will reflect on the ways in which we, as individuals, replicate these systems of incarceration and policing. In what ways do we judge members of our community? In what ways do we dispose of members of our community when we feel like they have wronged us? I think that as individuals, we replicate a lot of these really harmful systems. And I hope that in watching the film, you can see how these actions and judgments can really tear people apart and harm families, and instead practice restorative justice, practice love, and forgiveness and understanding.
All right, thank you all for answering those questions that's specific to your films. Now I kind of want to just open up the floor for everybody and talk a little bit about what you think about how the immigrant, refugee, and deportee experience are underrepresented, and what you would like to see more of kind of in the mainstream media. I think Luisa mentioned a little bit about, there being growing like Asian American representation. And so maybe if you guys could just talk a little bit about kind of the direction that Hollywood films are going in terms of representing the immigrant and refugee experience?
I think it's usually like kind of like it goes two ways. It's either like super traumatic and like tell the really hard story, or it's really stereotypical and and derivative and pandering, right? And so we have to find the middle ground where it's not like where it's truthful, where it's authentic to people's experiences and relationships. Like culturally, I feel like a lot of it is like if we talk about certain shows, Fresh Off the Boat or Kim's Convenience or even Nora from Queens, we're looking at it from this kind of like it's, of course it's comedy, but at the same time there's times when I sit there and I watch it and I go like, I don't know how I don't identify with a lot of what's happening on screen. And also it tells like very specific types of stories and like how Asian families exist, which is just like in North America, it's all over the place. There are no one size fits all for Asian families. So, and certainly across different cultures. Yeah, I'm hoping that, with more representation behind screen in the writer's room producing, that we'll get more authentic stories about our experiences, about our parents' experiences, and yeah, and talk about generational trauma, because it is quite hard to sit there and go like, oh, I don't even know where I'm from. And then we finally start to dig, find out some incredibly traumatic things. And then you go, oh, that explains so much in my life. And so hopefully that's what's going to happen. It's like, not just comedies, not just tragedies, but actual dramas and actual conversation of what it is to be, first and second generation.
I don't know if this answers the question, but I'm actually currently finishing up a doc that's featuring my mom. And I talked to her about her experience with her own mom, my grandmother. Um, and it's like, after my mom came to the US, my grandma was in Vietnam and she became blind after a while because she cried every day because she missed my mom so much. And so I think like reiterating, like having these very like specific, not one size fit all kind of conversations being on the screen is pretty important. And just sharing like it's not all about, I don't know, going to another place and trying to make like big money or something. It's more about like who do you miss? It's like what do you miss about where you're from? That kind of stuff I think I'd be interested in seeing.
Adding on to what you both have already said, another thing I'll add is just making sure that those who are the most marginalized in our communities have the agency to tell their own stories. I think oftentimes people will have this umbrella where it's like, no, I'm Asian American, therefore it totally makes sense for me to make a film about a formerly incarcerated queer Southeast Asian person. And we have to think about all of the different dynamics, all of the intersectionalities of our different identities, and making sure that we are empowering and centering and giving our like monetary resources to the people who are directly impacted by the issues in our film. And if we're not directly impacted, thinking about how we can take a step back and play more of a supporting role so that those people who face more marginalization can really take leadership and ownership over their own stories.
All right. So the next question is I kind of just thought of it on the spot, but like I feel like you guys are all female filmmakers here, and I was wondering if there are any kind of particular challenges that you face in an industry that is still male dominated.
Well, I can definitely talk to that. In Vancouver, we have a very large film industry, and I think I've been one of like 10 female Asian people on set ever, like, and not as actors, and even that is very rare, but as crew. And so like everybody knows my name, which is fantastic, but also it's really challenging to be taken seriously. The intersectionality of being a woman and as an Asian female is just far enough removed to not get hired, which is really discouraging. However, the numbers show that. And then, with the Hollywood, like I can speak to Hollywood, because I'm actively working within the system of Hollywood, and the numbers for directors in particular, um, have shown in the last year or two that women of color have not moved, but men of color have, and Caucasian women have. So, and it's because they're one step removed. So even though they're checking that diversity box, they're not. They're doing it because it's still subconscious bias where they're like, oh, I know who you are. You're white, but you're a girl. So, right. And then same with the other side. Oh, you're like, you're a man. So I get what you're saying. And so I'll check that box, but because you're POC. But any real intersectionality in regards to like, if you have more than one category, the numbers are really low. But like I said, the stats just came in like last year where it was like, no, 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 you guys are not doing the work. You're being performative about it. You're trying. But because those numbers are there, the awareness is growing and things are changing, which is really encouraging. I'm starting to feel the effects of it. I'm starting to get more opportunities, which is wonderful. But yeah, Hollywood is like, yeah, you just have to keep pushing and don't get discouraged. And people do a lot of talking, and then like you can get very talked down, discouraged. Your films don't get into festivals. Thank you, Viet Fest, by the way. But it's because not because your work's not good, but because just programming and stuff. And then the more we do the work, the more we get attention, the more we'll be in the right places to tell our stories. So for like young filmmakers out there, don't give up, just get better at your craft. And like and yes, you have to be better than your white counterparts, but also like it's not that hard.
Okay. Do you guys want to speak on this, Melanie or Lon, or are you guys good?
I'm not super active in the film industry, so I don't think I have too many firsthand experiences to comment on in regards to being a woman filmmaker. But one thing that I have noticed is that I think within the subset of filmmaking that I'm trying to do, which is community based filmmaking as a tool of mobilization, I think there's a lot of barriers to that. I think that traditional practices in filmmaking really are in direct opposition to many of the practices that I try to do. For example, I compensate the people in my documentary films, and that's seen as like unethical. It's seen as like, I forget what the word is, but it's very looked down upon in journalism. However, say you're making a documentary and you're interviewing Oprah, like you have to pay Oprah, right? Like Oprah has to be paid, even if it's documentary, and that's perfectly fine. However, if I try to pay the directly impacted family members whose stories are being shared in my film, that's all of a sudden looked down upon. So I think the film industry really is like a reflection of the way our societies work, and it really shows who's valued and who's not valued. And if we try to like work outside of the mold, then there are consequences. Like there's a lot of film festivals that I'm not eligible for. There's a lot of grants I'm not eligible for because of my practices that I think are deeply rooted in being just to the community. And I think that within the film industry, we really need to think about how do we tear down these systems that are asking us to be oppressive towards our own people.
Yeah, and I guess I've been thinking about this, and I don't have that many experiences too because I'm not in like Hollywood. I'm doing like documentary filmmaking, and it's very much so like I'm kind of the one person that's doing everything, like filming, doing the story, editing. And there are instances where I do take on commercial work as an editor, and I find myself sitting in a room full of white men, and I'm like, was I a diversity hire? Or they're like, I'm editing a film that's solely about like folks of color, and I feel like I'm the only person that's like the person of color that's doing any kind of work on this film. So there's those instances where I feel hyper visible, and I feel like there should be more voices of color that's working on these projects. Um, and so those are my points where I'm like, I feel like there just needs to be more access points to folks of color. for folks in low income areas that maybe don't have access to like cameras or don't even think of art as a place that they can kind of make a living in or pursue. So I think those are my points where I wish that there were more folks of color.
Yeah, the discussion about access is really important, right? So like for people who are young filmmakers of color who want to pursue that career trajectory, what advice would you kind of give them?
I think off the top of my head, I would say look for kind of community organizations that are either local or that pander to kind of like ghetto film school, or there's a lot that I can't name because I have terrible memory, but they're out there. And I'd also say like reach out to filmmakers that you're interested in, like, the way that they film, because I think if you reach out to them, sometimes they'll answer you back. Like, I would answer anyone if they were interested in learning about filmmaking, and I would love to share that knowledge. I just wanna make, like, that knowledge so that they can get that knowledge in any way or form.
I'm gonna sound like really jaded with the advice that I give, but my advice would be to like be careful whose advice you're listening to and taking from. I've had a lot of filmmakers give me advice to like change my practices, change the way I tell the story to better cater to like mainstream audiences. So in other words, like highly educated white male audiences. But I like to make my films for the communities that are in the film. So really like thinking about as you are entering the industry or like thinking about who you want to seek mentorship from, like really decide like who is this, what is this advice serving, and what are my goals. And if the person's like, yeah, maybe they're really successful, but they're telling you to change your vision to conform to like white America and you don't want to do that, like it's okay to say no.
Yeah, I'm gonna add to that where it's, being authentic to your own voice. Like we have our own perception of how life is, right? Like, yes, and being authentic to your vision is what makes you unique, and conforming to, the Hollywood standards, writing to the Caucasian eye or gaze, it's fine. But also, like that there's a ton of Caucasian people who do that already, and then they impose their vision on us, right? And so, personally, I feel like, uh, look at yourself, look at your authentic self, your authentic experience, and then write to that or make to that. And don't worry about what other people think. Like, yeah, like, okay, some stuff in regards to like story structure, there's some like universals, like a 3-act structure is very pleasing to no matter what your background is, because something about threes is good, like something about the golden ratio and the rule of thirds, all that is like really psychologically based. But when it comes to your own story, when it comes to your own filmmaking style, just like be authentic to yourself, try it. You have to trust your own taste, as Ira Glass would say, because you have to hone it, and then you over time will become better at it and be able to hone what you think and tell it. Sorry, I'm all over the place, but anyways. um, but also to young filmmakers, I say, like, make stuff. I know people always say, like, wait, use your phone, and it's hard. I'm not gonna lie, it's hard to make films, but you have to start. So even if it's something you never show anybody, it's just you, short films and films that you make on your own. Every piece is like a learning experience. You learn from your mistakes, so that way when you get to like getting money or funding, or you find that you actually do really want to do this as a living and pursue this further, then those mistakes were made early on, and you guys, hopefully you also built a team, or met some really great people to take up with you or go with you. And so that way, when you get to the point where you're actually like in film festivals, you're good and they like you, and then you'll get better. Every film I do is always like, okay, well, I learned that, don't do that again. Or like the happy accidents where it's like, oh my God, thank God that happened. Like, Hope and Grace, I didn't tell you this, but it got postponed once. And usually when you postpone any sort of filming, it's like, dear God, it's probably never going to be picked up again. Like, it's just like, I'm calling it postponed. It's probably never going to be shot. But then a friend of mine came up to me and she said, hey, Hope and Grace, did you actually make that? I'm like, no, it got postponed because of logistical reasons. And she's like, well, I'll help you produce it. And I was like, oh my God. And because of that whole shift of like to postponing it because it was the right thing to do, I got, casts that I never would have gotten. I've got locations that I never would have gotten otherwise. I got way more cooperation and like more time to really like gather the things I needed to make the film. And sometimes those are like those things that are horrible that happen in your process are actually gifts in disguise. I hate that, that term, but sometimes it's true. So just keep making stuff. Don't be like, it's scary. And also when you're putting your heart on the screen, you don't know if people like it. And every time you get a rejection, you're like, oh, nobody likes me. But really, you have to trust that your stuff is good. And if nobody likes it, then you have to trust that your stuff is still good, but you just need to make a better version of it and then move on from there. So pardon the lighting in here. It's like kind of wild.
That was such great advice from all of you guys. Thank you. And just to wrap up, I kind of want to end on a positive note. What was the most rewarding part of working on your films?
I'll go first because mine's narrative fiction. So firstly, getting it done, that was like, and working with such great artists, like my composers, I kid you not, it was like one of those moments where the artistry of being a director, you work really hard, but then you work with all these people and they truly do elevate your project to a whole nother level. Like there was like this one part during like, the oneer that I was like, oh, I mean, that was good. I'm good. But you just took it to like, so part of it is like just working with people that I love and us working together to make something really beautiful to share with everybody else. And so I have yet to see it with an audience. And so I'm really excited to like eventually like, show this in a crowd because I don't know. I'm hoping people like it.
I think for me, when I was making the film, I really wanted the film to be a tool for the community to use to mobilize other community members to spread awareness about the issue. And one of my steps was when I had my first edit of the film, I had this like film feedback party where I invited like everyone who I wanted feedback from, like students, educators, formerly incarcerated people, Montagnard Americans, like everyone who I could possibly want feedback from. And I was so nervous. And I was like, did I do justice to this story? Because everyone who I invited, like it was some piece of it was their story. And I was just so like happy to hear that folks who are a part of the communities that the film was about approved of the story, like felt like the story felt like the film did justice to their experiences. And it was just so like, it just felt like such a heavy thing that I was taking on. Is like, how do I tell these very important stories and do justice to all of these different people who have very different experiences of this issue? And I think that was the most rewarding part, was just seeing directly impacted people enjoy the film.
I think for me, something that made me really happy about it was shortlisted for an award when I was first sending it out. Thank you. I didn't win the award, but it was shortlisted, and I was like, "Oh my god, it's the first like big thing that's ever happened to me." And I showed it to my mom, and then she saw like the list of films, and she was looking at it. She's like, "Look, you're like Vietnamese made it on this list of like American names," and so that was like really exciting for me because like my mom was like, "Wow, look, Vietnamese, your representation right here." Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to be a part of this panel. So just for the viewers, Viet Film Fest runs through Saturday, October 30th. So this has been really great. Thank you guys for your insightful responses. And yeah, we really appreciate you being here. Thank you.